Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. All the coaching news you want to know for not just Washington, but around the NFL can be found on ESPN.com. Also, a couple program notes. I'm going to have Mike Jones on from The Athletic on Friday to talk about the openings around the league. How does Washington compare from his perspective to the other jobs that are open, both from a front office standpoint, but also as much from a coaching standpoint? Going to kind of go over these teams to see how does Washington stack up, because I got to be honest, folks, I keep hearing from people that I talk to who have people involved in this search process or, maybe have a stake in it, that they feel like this is the best one. And so anyways, but I want to get Mike's perspective because maybe there's something that we're not seeing that I'm not seeing, or maybe I'm looking at a couple things incorrectly, but I think this is a really good opening. And I think we're going to see that based on who Washington ends up hiring. And I still expect, we've been saying this all along, and Josh Harris said on Monday, rapid but thorough. And the way he works in the past is exactly that way. They've already wrapped up a handful of interviews for the front office job: Adam Peters, Alec Hallaby, Mike Borgonzi, Ian Cunningham, and Glenn Cook. So they've already wrapped those up. So they're in a good spot to now then go get the guy they want. So I would not be shocked if this is wrapped up by early next week. I don't have that coming from anybody in the Harris group. However, you know that they want to get this done fast. And here's like one of the things that, again, I plugged this story before that I wrote on Josh Harris and how he comes to decisions, how quickly they do it. So a little anecdote about Daryl Morey. So Morey, he went after him a couple of times. In 2018, went after him. Morey decides to stay with the 76ers. In 2020, Morey resigns. He had told his wife it's going to be a hiatus year. He wanted to take time off. He had been in the league for about 15, 20 years and just wanted to take some time to kind of, just enjoy his family, whatever it is. So he had planned to take a year off. Within a day, he's on the phone with Josh Harris. Still thinks he's going to take a year off. Flies up to the Hamptons to meet with Harris and brings his wife up to meet with Harris up in the Hamptons. And they have a great conversation. And he was swayed by, Harris, he goes, it was a really good family pitch. Wasn't just about X's and O's, basketball, whatever. But he still said he thought he was still going to take some time off. Harris gets him because when he wants a guy, he's going to get the guy. And I do think, when you talk to people in the league, the name that they're going to keep coming back to that they think will end up here is Adam Peters from San Francisco. I don't know that for a fact by any means, but certainly I know he's a guy that would have been high on their list. And I also don't, to be honest, when you just kind of look at it and read a situation, I don't think he's taking these interviews if he doesn't think that it's going to be that he has a really, really, really good chance of ending up with his job, because he's been very judicious and he hasn't taken these interviews before. He's turned them down because he has a good setup in San Francisco. He has a lot of power and say. He's a guy that has a heavy influence in their draft, very knowledgeable about that. I had Nick Wagner, who covers the 49ers for ESPN, on my podcast a couple of weeks ago to talk in part about Adam Peters and his impact there. It's pretty vast. The key is, what is John Lynch's future in San Francisco? And if he's going to stay there for a few more years, then if you're Adam Peters, you're going to look to build your own place somewhere. And I don't know that you're going to get a better chance than this one. And for a few reasons, and I'll get to that in a minute. All the interviews have been taking place in Florida at Josh Harris's home down there. I'm sure you know that by now. The other part is whoever they hire is the guy that's going to determine what happens with Martin Mayhew, still in the role as GM. And again, that front office, everybody I've talked to there, the expectation has been that they would be fired, but that's still going to be up to whomever they hire for this president of football operations role. And I'll also be curious to see, do they also then maybe take one of these guys that they've interviewed for here and then use, maybe give them the GM title to work under Peters and kind of form a team that way. I don't know how desirable it would be for them, because, if you're Ian Cunningham, you may have a better title here, but would you have a different role than you have in Chicago working for Ryan Poles? I don't know. So it just depends on if you can get that title, which would be a bump, in a promotion, but is a role any different? And I don't know. So, because ultimately whoever has that president of football ops is going to have that kind of power in the organization. So, but again, this role, whoever gets that would determine what happens to Martin Mayhew. I'd be really surprised if he stays in that current role. You never know, because nothing's official. And so until something's official, then you just don't know. That's a guess, not a report. And it's an educated guess based on everything we had heard leading up to this, but he's still in the role, and it's not up to anybody but whoever comes in to that job. And so maybe they find a role, maybe they do something different. I don't know. That's all speculation. And so, it's not a report. So just take that for what it's worth. Again, when I talk to others in the league, they certainly would point to Peters as the guy they think is going to get it. And again, you read the tea leaves, but I would say, I think there are people who like all these other guys. Like every one of these guys that you hear is like, oh, I like this guy because of X. So, I think it's not like Peters is the only candidate out there. And it's funny because I talked to someone today who brought up a couple of names that they're not even being mentioned for any of these jobs. Like Elliot Wolf, who's now in New England, is a guy who a couple of years ago was the hot name, not being brought up, but someone I talked to is like, that's the best guy out there. But, sometimes the cycle just passes you by a little bit. And, the other guy that we know is Kyle Smith, who is in Atlanta. I think they've done a nice job with that roster. They just couldn't find a quarterback, but they have a lot of other pieces there. And, but because of that, you're still going to kind of be stuck in that role, and you don't get, and Kyle, I know some of these guys do not play the game to get their name out there. And so that doesn't, that's part of what happens in this league. Not always the right way to do it. But I also think, like, from a Kyle Smith perspective, that Atlanta would have to be a winner for him to really start to get the notice that I think he probably warrants. When I talk to people, almost everybody will say when they look at a job, the number one thing they look at is ownership. That's why when everybody kind of focuses on other aspects, oh, the Chargers have Justin Herbert, or they have this, it starts with ownership, because if you don't have the ownership, then you're not going to make it right. And with that, now there is someone I did talk to who did bring up quarterback. Now this was a coach, an offensive minded coach, and that was his first thing, was like, you got to have the quarterback, because if you don't have that, you can't win. But to build a winning team, you've got to have good ownership in place. And we still don't know what kind of ownership Harris will have here, or how effective this group will be. But, it's a far cry from what happened here in the past. And that's why they have a chance. And I'm telling you, like, I talk to a lot of people who feel like this is the primo job that's open, even with the Seattle and, especially Tennessee. I don't think that's necessarily an attractive place because of the just different market, et cetera. But even with Seattle opening, one guy texted me tonight, was like, I asked him, he ranked his jobs, and it was Washington and then Seattle. So, so just keep that in mind. But I'm going to talk to Mike about that on Friday as well. I think a big thing with ownership is, and this is what what they're looking for if you're a coach, your front office, is that the willingness by the owner to invest resources, not just player acquisition, but in terms of, things in the facility, the resources they devote to that. And I think they'll be pretty good with that. The support staff, you need to have a big training staff so guys can go in there in the training room and know they can get just be able to get out of bed and get worked on before practice. Little things like that go a long way. And just toward the maintenance and care of your players, that's a big deal. And I also think it's about changing, I know that word culture in the building, but it's also changing it from the standpoint of, and I think it's what the football side and the building side can be different, but it's also getting people in there who are upbeat and enthusiastic about going to work every day. And I think that was certainly under the previous regime, you get beaten down. And I think there's probably still some PTSD because of that. So we'll see. Speaking of the business side, and I know a lot of people ask about Jason Wright. I have not expected anything to go on there with him at this point. I don't, there's no rush to do anything because he's strictly going to be on the business side. He's not going to have any impact on the football side. I think that was made pretty clear to me. But also I think to him. And so his job is on the business side. And so he's not involved in any of these football decisions. So I wouldn't sit there and worry about what he's going to do because I think right now, again, they're taking care of the football side. And that's why I bring it up from the standpoint of, not demeaning with him, but just to say he doesn't have any role in what's going in now. And what his focus is now is selling tickets, selling suites, the business side, the sponsorships, all that stuff that can make a lot of money for the franchise. And I think that's an important role, but it's one that they don't feel like they have to go and address now. So I think I've told you before, I believe his contract is up at some point this year. And so they don't have to make a decision on him at this point. And I think it could well be that like, hey, this is your role, and then see how he handles it and see if he likes that role and wants to stick around. I don't know. But my point in that is there's nothing that's going on now. They don't have to do all that stuff right now. And I think they still want to see what goes on there. Anyway, but again, the priority right now is finding the president of football operations. And again, Jason Wright would be business side only. Anyways, back to what teams look for. So you start with the ownership, and then you're looking at, you can look at things like cap space, draft picks. So in both those areas, Washington has the most cap space available this offseason in the NFL. And then they have the second overall pick, as you know. They have 5 picks in the top 100, as you know. So that also is very attractive. So they can go out. It's a draft where, whether or not the quarterbacks hit, they have a chance to get a guy that they feel like they could build around. And that has to be attractive. Now you just have to make it work. It can be very tough to make it work with quarterbacks, as we know, but that's, they get a chance to get a guy in here to that they can go get. And then you look at like what's happened in Chicago with the Bears clearly keeping Matt Eberflus, but changing their staff. What does that mean first of all, it takes away one less opening for a head coaching job. But what does that mean for the draft? Does this mean that they're going to stick with Justin Fields? Are they going to go after Caleb Williams? Don't know yet, because I don't know that they fully know. They might know now what they want to do with Justin Fields, but I know like even a couple weeks ago, they genuinely weren't sure which direction they were going to go. So that could impact what happens with Washington, of course, depending on what they decide. And then if they decide not to go with a Caleb Williams, then that number 1 pick is up for grabs. And if you're Washington, how much would you, if you wanted Caleb Williams? And I don't know that they do, and here's the other thing, nobody knows because we don't know who's in charge. And one thing I know, and it's funny because I see things like, Josh Harris would want Caleb Williams because he's from the area. You got the wrong owner, folks. That dude sold the team. I don't think Josh Harris is going to say, hey, Caleb Williams is from the area, so we've got to get him at all costs. That's not how he operates. Yes, he'll go be aggressive going for a guy if the football people tell him that this is the guy to get, but he's not going to go and usurp authority, use his authority as the owner to top what the football people might tell him. If they tell him like, we don't want this guy because of this, I don't think Josh Harris is going to say, tough noogies, here we go. Again, that dude sold the team. So I think you can, if they go out and trade up for Caleb Williams, it's because whomever's in charge, they have recommended that this is the way they need to go. This is not about selling tickets. So, I think we can stop that kind of chatter, because they've been selling tickets and they need to sell more to their own people, to their own fans. But you do that by winning too. I don't think, if you just go out and think Caleb Williams is the answer like that, yeah, people will get excited, but you still got to keep them around by winning. So you're going to get the best guy based on your football recommendations. And, so we'll see. Anyway, but in looking at some of the other jobs that open, Seattle, their roster, it's an okay roster. I mean, they have good parts, but is Geno Smith with a long-term answer there? What's their ownership situation like? John Schneider, excellent in the front office. I think there's some questions there, but I think I would probably put that as certainly a maybe right after this job as a top job. The Chargers, it still comes down to, do you trust the ownership there to make the right decisions? You're also playing in a market that is you're the number 2 team in town, in a market that I don't know how much they like the number 1 team, and that you're the number 2 team. Such a silly move for them to go to LA. It just, in terms of franchise recognition. And so and does that matter to a coach? I don't know. But if it does, if you look at the two and say, well, yeah, you got Justin Herbert, how good do you think he is? Do you think he's a guy you can win with? And then looking at the roster around him, is that, how long is it going to take to get that there versus some of the other teams, whether it's here, Seattle, whatever. Atlanta, I'm not sure I trust the owner at this point. Not a bad owner, but I don't know that he's, I don't know that he's that, how patient would he be if you're, let's say, a Ben Johnson, you're kind of looking at it. Is that the place you want to go? I don't know. Like, what's your solution to get the quarterback? I know they're picking top 10. And so we'll see there. Tennessee, no. So there you go. And again, going back to the leadership position with Peters, I mean, he interviewed on Wednesday, still would be the perception that he would, be I wouldn't say leader in the clubhouse, because that sounds like some sort of, that sounds more than what I know. I just know this is an expectation of people around the league that I've talked to, but that's just like, it makes sense. Or this, again, because I think he's interviewing, it certainly is like, oh, okay, that's interesting that he wanted to interview. He does have a relationship with Bob Myers as well. So we'll see what happens there. I did, there's someone else I talked to a couple people I talked to really like Ian Cunningham, and, feel like he's a really sharp guy, just likes to go out on the road, has made some good finds in personnel, comes from two good organizations in the Ravens, the Eagles, has had more power in Chicago. And, it's funny because I know some people are like, well, he's from Chicago, he's there. Well, he was with the Eagles and the Ravens too. So that matters a lot. And if you cut off, like, it's funny because people say, well, that team stinks. Why would you take some from there? Well, if the Rams had taken that approach a few years ago, they wouldn't have ended up with Sean McVay. So, you can't just go based on that. There are good people in mediocre organizations, which the Bears have been, or kind of bad, but he's only been there 2 years, but he comes from a good organization, just like Hallaby does. Hallaby, the one thing I wonder about with him, his background is very similar to Eugene Shen. So how would that mesh? Is he ready for that kind of a bigger role maybe? But there's some similarities to what they have done in the past. So would you want to do that, or is he ready for a higher role? I don't know. I know people who like him, who have worked for him. So we'll see. And we'll get more in depth as to when we know maybe who, the guy is, right? But the other thing too, I think that is some people, when I talk to, are looking forward to, is to having one voice in that room. Because I've talked to agents over the years that they never know, who do you talk to here? Are you talking to Martin Mayhew, Marty Herney? Is it Ron Rivera? I think, again, I've said before, I think if Rivera had it to do over again, he would not have taken that coach-centric approach. I don't think it necessarily fit how he wanted to do things. I think he's better as a guy like, be your CEO football coach, but have people above you who can make certain decisions and help you out. But if you're the guy in charge and you got to make the decisions, I think it's a difficult hat to sometimes wear for everybody. It's just too much. And so I think it led to some confusion for people. Who do you talk to in this situation? And these guys might say, well, it wasn't that complicated, but to people on the outside, I think it was. So I think that's something that people are looking forward to having, is if you get a Peters or an Ian Cunningham or Glenn Cook, whomever it is, you get them in there at that president of football ops, there you're going to go. And then you're going to have the GM. So it may, or a clear line of power. And I think that's going to help get this organization to have some level of symmetry that it hasn't had in a long time. And it's not there. I would say this, like, even when Kyle Smith was here, I felt like they had it. And I felt like, it was hard to always understand what happened with him here. I do think that some of that, I think it kind of turned for him after some of those reports came out. And I think Snyder just wanted to remove all vestiges of the Bruce Allen hiring, which was a shame because Kyle Smith was really good. But I think there was a synchronicity with that And I don't know that it was, I just think it was more so sometimes for outsiders, some confusion about who was running it and who they needed to talk to get something done. So that's where we're at right now. And now the coaching interviews, you're probably going to hear, we'll hear once they get through this, you're going to start to hear more names, and we're going to know more moves, whether again, they make a move with GM, or do they reassign? Maybe they do some different titles. I don't know. But then we'll get into the coaching candidates, and that's when you're going to hear some more names other than guys that we've already heard: Ben Johnson, Dan Quinn, Raheem Morris, Aaron Glenn, Anthony Weaver. So, those are some of the names, and I think I may have left one off, and I just, off the top of my head, I can't remember. So if I did, I apologize. But those are the names that you hear, that right now would be in the mix. Would there be some more? Because there's, Bobby Sloak was the one. And then you can look at, is there a guy like a Frank Smith in Miami? There's a lot that I like about him. What about Dave Canales in Tampa Bay? Would he be up for maybe more of a job in Seattle? I don't know. So I think there's other, Evero, the defensive coordinator in Carolina, is an interesting guy. Has he done enough with the defense there? I think he did a really good job there this year with that D, considering how bad the team was. But is he that kind of a candidate? I don't know. I think some of these guys would be very wise to hire as a defensive coordinator, whether it's a Patrick Graham, Evero, someone like that. So we'll see where it goes. Wink Martindale's free too. We know that what he can do as a D coordinator. And I think you look at the Giants D, and there wasn't always a ton of talent there. And yet he always made things difficult for this team in particular. So listen, the fact that Wink Martindale's out of the NFC East might help this team win another game or two next year. So anyway, that's it for me, folks. I appreciate you tuning in. And that's the latest that I have here. It's one thing I give this group credit for, is they really are kind of keeping things quiet. And I think that's a good way for them to go. Doesn't always help me. You find, you spend a lot of time on the phone, texting, talking, whatever, trying to find out morsels of information. And, I think we'll start coming together soon with some of this stuff, but they're handling it in a way that's been pretty good and productive for them so far. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll be back on Friday morning with Mike Jones from The Athletic, looking at this job. How does he feel it compares to others on the outside? And I'll have some more voices for you coming early next week to bring you some insight into, what people look for in an organization, and how do you go about hiring coach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There you go. Talk to you next time.